President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure in my capacity as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants to be able to address this distinguished room of migration policymakers and advocates at this panel discussion organized to prepare for the 2013 UN High-Level Dialogue on International Migration and Development. I very much welcome the High-Level Dialogue as an important opportunity for the widest range of actors, including states, intergovernmental organizations, and NGOs, to come together to discuss migration in a multilateral setting. 7 years after the first high-level dialogue on migration and development, it will be a unique opportunity to take stock of the progress accomplished in the global discussions about migration policies worldwide and to outline issues that still need academic research, policy developments at national, regional, and global level. In particular, I believe it is an important moment to reflect on the mainstreaming of human rights into all aspects of the migration debate. I'm particularly heartened by the fact that the high-level dialogue will have a roundtable specifically dedicated to measures to ensure respect for and protection of the human rights of all migrants. I note, however, that human rights must be a cross-cutting issue that informs all discussions at the high-level dialogue. Migrants are human beings with human rights, not simply agents for economic development through, inter alia, the sending of remittances. I thus welcome the fact that the General Assembly, in its Resolution 172 of the 67th session, requested member states, the United Nations system, international organizations, civil society, and all relevant stakeholders, especially the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, myself, and the Global Migration Group, to ensure that the high-level dialogue analyzes the linkage between migration and development in a balanced and comprehensive manner that includes, among others, a human rights perspective. Concerning Roundtable 2, it is incredibly important that we are vigilant not to encourage blurring of categories such as migration, smuggling, and trafficking in human beings. The topic for Roundtable 2 thus clearly distinguishes between, firstly, a focus on promoting human rights of migrants, whilst, secondly, combating smuggling and trafficking. It is thus important that these two issues are sufficiently de-linked. Otherwise, the conflation of the topics may falsely give the impression that irregular migration is a criminal offense in line with trafficking or smuggling, and the conflation of the issues may contribute to the undue criminalization of irregular migration. With this in mind, I hope that the HLD's Roundtable 2 will be organized around two interlinked but separate panels, as was the case for the third roundtable of the 2013 High-Level Dialogue series called Towards the 2013 High-Level Dialogue on International Migration and Development, which was held in New York in February. Furthermore, it is important to distinguish between smuggling and trafficking. While trafficking by definition includes exploitation and entails a number of serious human rights violations, smuggling is essentially the service of moving people from point A to point B and does not necessarily involve any human rights violation. I hope this distinction will be taken into consideration during the discussions at the high-level dialogue. In line with the human rights-based approach, the pursuit of migration as an inclusive, equitable, and sustainable process can only take place when human beings become the central concern of migration policymaking. In this regard, I would like to make specific mention of the question of terminology. In my work as Special Rapporteur, I have intentionally emphasized the importance of using the term irregular migration and migrants in an irregular situation. This is in accordance with relevant international consensus and human rights standards. In light of the fact that irregular migration is not a crime, and irregular migrants are not criminals per se, the use of the expression illegal migrant should be avoided at all costs. The UN General Assembly Resolution 3449 of the 9th of December 1975 recommended that stakeholders avoid using the term illegal to describe migrants in an irregular situation. Using incorrect terminology that negatively depicts individuals as illegal contributes to the negative discourses on migration and further reinforces negative stereotypes against migrants. Moreover, such language legitimates a discourse of the criminalization of migration, which in turn contributes to the further alienation, marginalization, discrimination, and ill treatment of migrants on a daily basis. This is of paramount importance in the context of the high-level dialogue, given the diverse nature of migration and the plethora of institutions engaged on diverse aspects of regional migration. A coherent framework which insists on human rights as its core and which avoids language which can undermine a human rights approach is of paramount importance. Concerning the legal framework, I wish to remind everyone that all migrants, by virtue of their human dignity and without discrimination, and with two narrowly defined exceptions, the right to vote and be elected and the right to enter and stay in the country, all migrants are protected by international human rights law on the same footing as citizens. The two human rights covenants explicitly refer to national origin as a prohibited ground of discrimination in the enjoyment of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Human rights are not only citizens' rights. The fundamental tenets of international human rights law, non-discrimination and equality of treatment, have to be fully applied to migrants, just as they are to any other marginalized group in society. Ensuring the prohibition of discrimination in law and practice has been identified as a key challenge in ensuring protection of the human rights of migrants at the national level. The human rights standards contained in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the two international human rights covenants, the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families, and other international human rights instruments, as well as related normative standards of other branches of law, particularly refugee law and international labor law, thus provide a solid framework for policy making on migration. However, despite the legal framework in place, migrants continue to suffer abuse, exploitation, and violence. The lack of understanding about human rights of migrants makes them an increasingly vulnerable group, easily targeted. As a result of this lack of information and understanding, migrants are increasingly subject to xenophobia, anti-migrant sentiment, hate speech, and hate crimes, which in and of themselves are human rights violations and can lead to further serious human rights abuses, particularly when physical violence is involved. In this regard, there is an urgent need to counter the increasing social acceptance of xenophobic and anti-immigrant discourse, which dehumanizes the movement of individuals in search for a better life behind populist terminologies such as flocks and flows and waves of people. In such discourse, the individual has no place, no name, and no rights. It also severely undermines the public understanding of the positive contribution that migrants, as engines of new experiences, perspectives, and ideas, bring to a country's social and economic development. Here are some of the issues I hope will come up in the discussions at the high-level dialogue. The decriminalization of irregular entry and stay, which should never be considered criminal offenses. The move away from detention as a tool in combating irregular migration. How to ensure awareness raising on the human rights of migrants. How to combat xenophobia and xenophobic violence against migrants. How to ensure effective protection of the human rights of children in states of origin, transit, and destination. How to ensure the enjoyment of all economic, social, and cultural rights, including the rights to education, health, and adequate housing for all migrants, including irregular migrants. How to ensure the human rights of migrants at the borders, both at entry and during expulsion procedures. How to ensure migrants access to recourse to independent institutions on all the human rights violations they face due to their migration status. In order to properly deal with all these issues, I believe there is a need for greater involvement of the UN in the global debate on migration. My 2013 report to the General Assembly, which I will present to the Third Committee towards the end of October, will look at global migration governance and its impact on the human rights of migrants. The report will explore the framework for migration governance, both inside and outside the UN, and we look at both the global, regional, bilateral, and national levels of governance. One idea which I will present in the report will be to hold regular high-level dialogues with a negotiated outcome document. My report will be available online on my mandate's webpage before the high-level dialogue takes place, and I hope that the report and its recommendations can contribute to the discussions at the high-level dialogue on the future of global migration governance, particularly how it can be improved in order to enhance the respect, protection, and fulfillment of the human rights of migrants. I look forward to discussing all these issues more in detail at the high-level dialogue, where I hope to be able to contribute actively to the discussions as a whole, and also particularly in Roundtable 2. Thank you very much.